What is up, guys? It's Mason once again, and we are looking at the games from round 3 to round 6 of the 2024 National Chess Championships. Day 1 was a very poor showing, right? There were so many games there I should have won, but I just couldn't manage to win them. So I was hoping for a good result in day 2. Now, to qualify, I need at least 6 points. And there are just 6 games remaining, so I have to win at least 5 games. I only have like the leverage to lose, or the ability to lose at least 1 game or draw 1 game, right? But I have to go like 5 straight wins. So I was hoping to try and do that in day 2. So day 2 begins, and my opponent is David Achampon. That is Dave Chief Ponce's father, and I was expecting a very tough game, right? Because he's coached chess for a very long time, and I've even worked under him for a bit. So I was kind of wondering what kind of game he'd play, but I did have this sinking suspicion that he would play similar to what Maxwell played. Now, Maxwell played this interesting line against the London, again with the usual c5. I got a good position, but I wasn't confident in my end game. And at the end of every round, I saw David analyzing the game. So I had this feeling that he would play exactly what Maxwell played, but with a few adjustments. So even though I was a little bit like pissed off, I looked briefly at the lines and looked at the improvements I could have made from my game against Maxwell. So we got d4, knight f6, bishop f4, d5, e3, c5, knight c3, and then a6. And after a6, we take c5. So this was the line I played against Maxwell. And I was expecting that Dave would play similar or better, right? And Maxwell played after, I think, knight c6, knight c6, knight f3. He played like e5. I don't know how to play this e5 line. Yeah, I think after the knight, I played a6, then he played e5 or something, right? So that's what I was kind of like expecting. Let me turn off the analysis because it's making my camera use a lot. Okay. So I played, so he played queen a5, which is slightly different. Maxwell in this position played knight to c6, and then I played a3. So he played queen to a5, and here I played a move I knew was bad, but I was kind of trying to force something out of him. So I played queen d4. Queen d4, my opponent finally plays knight to c6, and then I played queen to a4. Again, I'm not winning this trade, but then I can have some like future pressure on this guy. Should all things go well, there are plans of this bishop coming in and annoying my opponent. So I was kind of looking at something here. Now, this move I don't think is good. I don't think it's good, but it kind of works because here my opponent makes a very slight error. He plays e6, and this e6 ended up sort of like being the undoing of his position, right? Because I did take the pawn, and mostly you give this pawn back to gain activity as white. But this move he played allows me to actually hold on to the pawn. And now I'm a pawn up, and my opponent has to prove that he's okay. So he plays d4 here. I take, sorry, what's happening? I take, he plays knight takes, and now I ask myself a question: what is the best move here? And I told myself, if I see the best move, I'll go for it regardless of how I feel. Now, my whole thing was I did not want to castle queenside because I was envisioning this whole thing with after he develops, then he brings the rogues, then he plays pawn push, he weakens this structure, and I get checkmated. And I'm like, I have to castle queenside, right? But it feels dangerous. But I told myself that I won't make the same mistake I made against Maxwell, playing to like my feelings. I'll just play what I believe is objectively the best move, and I castled. My opponent plays knight to f5, bishop to d3. Now I'm getting my pieces out. We have bishop to e7, bishop takes e7, e takes f5, and then I played rook to e1. This may not be a good move, but my point is I want to kind of pressure my opponent and make it hard for him to castle, right? My opponent plays bishop to e6, knight to f3, knight to h5, and here I went bishop this way because, again, he's going to castle, and I don't want to relieve any pressure of my opponent. This kind of keeps the pressure because my opponent can't castle because he loses the bishop. And should he take, I can take. And if he does castle, he loses another pawn. So He plays h6, I trade off, and then I go knight to d5. And the point of this is to get my knight to this wonderful square, which kind of really disturbs my opponent and makes it hard for him to even do anything with his rook. We go rook to b8, and then I recheck my opponent. Going this way is fine, I guess, but I don't know what he was kind of worried about here. Maybe about knight d4, rook h to e1. I don't know exactly what was scaring him here, but he goes king to c7. I play knight to d4, rook h to d8, rook h to e1, and now my opponent plays knight to f4. I realized, I mean, I could even just give him this pawn and focus on my attack, but this knight added defense to this, and I think that's what he wanted, because he wanted to transfer his knight from a passive position to a more active defender. And even though, yes, that is a fine and dandy idea, I still get my flow going. So when you look at this position and you consider all the options, all the threats and all the things you can possibly do to your opponent, in all the lines of capturing, I realized that if I don't play like accurately, I'm going to maybe give my opponent the game back. But there's one thing I saw in this position, and that is a fork, right? If my knight takes, I'm forking these two guys. The only problem is that if my knight takes, and then rook takes, and that's fine. But I realized there was a nicer way of doing this, because I can play rook takes, the rook defends the knight. So if he does try to capture, I can capture with my rook, and I'm still better. And after pawn takes, knight takes, and then we get this whole position where I'm up a pawn. I'm actually up. I'm up a pawn, and I'm up an exchange. My king can help in the defense of this position. My rooks are just going to like feed on these pawns, and I'm going to make one or two queens. So fortunately for me in this position, David resigned the game. So we started the game off well. We had a win, brushed off the problems from the previous day, and now we are hoping to continue with this same like fire and get good wins. So we go on to our next game, and in the next game I play against Professor Adanu. So in the next game I play against Professor Adanu, and for the first time I did something I don't usually do. And what do I mean by this? Mostly I play whatever I want, or what I want. I have my established lines against whatever it is my opponent is going to play. But for the first time, I sought for like advice. Like I asked, what does my opponent play? In fact, I looked at it briefly and I saw he plays the Queen's Gambit declined. So I asked, like, what do they think I should play against him? And my friends gave me some kind of like some advice. But the advice they gave me was very contrary to my style. But I decided I would play it because I mean I can figure out like what they were saying was foreign to me. But I decided I would go with it. So we had d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3. And with me, I'm always going to go bishop to b4, right? That is the idea I often and always go for. But I was actually told I should try this line with g6. Not to say I've not played this line before, just that I haven't prepared it for this tournament. My opponent played bishop to f4. I went c6 like a London. Now, I wasn't so off about this because I've seen lines about this when I used to study chess in the past. So I know that there's this crazy line of you play this, making your opponent think you're coming in this way, but then you go back to this whole like ninja idea. So I was also considering those ideas. And after knight f3, knight d7, e3, knight g to f6, h3, I played bishop to b4. But the timing is wrong. Right, this is not how exactly you're supposed to go about it. So I'm putting myself in a bad position, playing a game I don't understand, right? But I still think I am fine. But there's something you notice about this game is that I'm playing my game while trying to play what I was asked to try. Now, my opponent, my friends didn't give me the moves. They just told me to play in a specific style, right? They told me to play. They asked me to play in a specific style, which I'm bad at, but I decided I will go about it, right? So we have a3, I trade, and then I get knight to e4. Knight to e4, queen to c2, and I play the same thing I played day one. I play g3, g5. Again, this is bad, but it's worth it. Why is it worth it? I don't expect my opponent to castle queen side. I expect him to castle king side. And even if it may be a worse position for me, the threat and the pressure that comes from moves like these might cause my opponent to self-destruct, which was the plan I was going for, right? Scare him, make him make a mistake, right? We get bishop to h2, and then I play queen to a5, which is off. Like, continue with your plan. You could play this, you could come in here, you could like create problems for your opponent on the queen side. But I see this guy and I'm like, this guy and I'm like, oh wait, that's a free pawn. I play queen to a5, my opponent goes rook to c1, I take, he takes, I take, and then the reason I went for the pawn is I was aware of the fact that the pawn there, even though it's hanging, it's going to take my queen time to come back and join the defense. But once I realized that my queen could get back before any scary sort of attack would happen, I was like, okay, then I would go for it. And I was kind of right, because after takes here, my position is not so bad. Again, you may not see it, but I kind of get what I'm talking about here. Because even though, yes, my king is looking awkward, there's no real way my opponent can instantly add pressure. And believe it or not, I can castle. Right? So I'm fully aware of all these things and I'm like, nah. Even though I started badly, this is okay for me. But in this position, I just kept on worrying about f3. And I was like, if my opponent plays it now, what can I do? And I thought f3 would really like annoy me. So I decided to play against f3. I could go this way. And this is a miscalculation again. So you can see that, yeah, I get tensed there and I get make a miscalculation. I was believing that if bishop takes, I can take here. And if here, my queen can take the rook. But obviously it can't. The next thing I was thinking was that if my opponent, for example, played this, then I had takes here with check. And I could like pressure my opponent some way somehow or do something. But of course, if my opponent comes in here strong, so he has to play a move like this, which allows me to come back if possible. My opponent takes with his queen and I can maybe check it. Some funny plans were going through my head. I thought it would work, but obviously we can see that everything I was playing is wrong. But my opponent ignores all that and castles, focusing on his king safety. I bring the bishop back, realizing that I'm messing up. Rook comes in. My king tries to dodge this full alignment. And then finally he plays f3. So I was not aware that he was first of all trying to attack the castle. And I ended up making very bad moves. But as bad as my moves were, we get into this position where, yes, I was a little bit too worried about this move, and that was dumb. But I'm actually completely fine. I'm not as bad, worse off as I was like thinking. I'm actually completely fine in this position. And the end game is not looking so bad. I have this outside pass pawn. But something, well, my accent came in. Something about this position happened, like in my mind, and I played this move. Completely missing bishop to c4. And I resigned the game here. All I had to do was play this. And yes, I'm up a pawn, so my opponent taking this is not a problem. I can simply hide my king here, and the game continues. But for some reason, I was caught up in a certain kind of thought, and I messed up the position, right? But all is well. We do have one allowable loss. As long as we don't continue losing, we will definitely be fine. Hence, we go into game 3. So this is game 3 of day 2, and I played against a newbie. Okay, it says 1677, but I don't think he's actually 1677. He was unrated when I checked, so I don't know where the 1677 is coming from. I know I'm 1677, but yeah, I'm playing white against an unrated player. And I mean, I'm white. What am I going to play? d4. Knight f6, bishop f4, and then g6. When he played g6, I was actually happy because you guys know I like this variation in particular. Knight c3, bishop g7. I was a little bit worried he would play d5 here, but he played bishop g7. I go e4. Castles, queen d2. Here I wasn't so sure I should like advance because my opponent is actually giving me the spatial advantage. but I wasn't so sure I should like advance. So I just decided to play like the traditional lines without trying to interfere so much with what I'm supposed to do. Finally, my opponent plays d5, but here I think it's a tad bit too late. I go e5, he goes knight e4, takes, and then I castle queenside. The idea is still the same without the defense of the rook, the knight, sorry, and I'm going h4, h5, causing problems for my opponent. But then my opponent plays queen d5. And I'm like, oh, he's that kind of player. Like, the moment he played this, I realized he's an aggressive player and I'm about to be attacked. That's what I remembered. So my first instinct here was actually the correct instinct was to play c4. But I was a little bit worried about weakening my position. So I did not play that move instantly. I played king to b1 because I didn't want to weaken myself. I didn't want to make mistakes of this. But the engine doesn't actually like this move. It starts to give black an advantage here, especially with the move c5 coming in. But my opponent doesn't play the best move. He plays this move, which seeks to checkmate me in a very short move. But this move seemed to be his undoing. His aggressive nature prevented him from seeing the best move. And this move actually helps me because now c4 is very good. Queen goes back. I continue with my idea here because, first off, if I can trade off this bishop, any attack here would not be as scary as it normally would be. And then I can focus on even playing the move d5 here. My opponent then plays c5, but the timing is wrong. He could have played it earlier. So now I get the trade, and then I play finally d5. So at this point, I'm in control of the game. But again, don't forget, there's a move like b5. There are things that my opponent can play to start an attack against me. So I'm fully aware of that. My opponent plays bishop to f5. I know what he's trying to do. I was thinking about either here or here, but then I just decided I'll block the pawn from moving. Queen to e3, knight to a5, and then I play h3 because I'm threatening my opponent and continue with my plan. And I was very sure that I could play this move because if my opponent, for example, rushes in with this, he's not getting anything out of it, right? But even if you do come in here, I can takes, and then I just simply go back here. The bishop has to go this way, and then I can just take back. Completely. So I was sure that the knight couldn't be played, which is why I could play h3, a3. And this move actually helps me. My opponent plays queen to a5, and I see what he's trying to do. So I immediately go knight to e2. And the second reason for knight to e2 is not just to defend this, but it's a foresight move of if I play here, my opponent comes in here, then eventually comes in here. I don't want to have to make a move like this, right? Even though moving my rook here might help me. So my opponent finally plays b5. I take, queen takes, knight jumps in, and with this comes up. My opponent missed that. But I'm sure he was happy either way, simply because now he has a rook file open to attack my king. So finally I played g4. Bishop goes back. I had to be very sure before I played this move, but I could. My opponent finally plays rook a to b8. And here I make a slight miscalculation. For some reason, I thought this move actually helps me because pawn push takes. If bishop takes, I take. But I completely missed the fact that the queen was defending. So when I made this move, he took, I took, then he took. I was like, isn't that a blunder? Until I realized, oh wait, I actually messed up. Still winning for me. So what do? I'm looking at all the threats my opponent has. And I'm also seeing certain possibilities that come with queen check. But I don't want to use it first. I don't want to use it immediately. It's a resource I want to keep. So I start by adding pressure to my opponent's position. Reason being, bishop moves, you have this, and you can do so much, right? And here my opponent gets super greedy and goes rook takes f2. Completely missing my idea. Queen to e5 check. And my opponent resigned. Now there are other moves because here in this position he resigned, but he was telling me that what he saw in this position was that he could go back, and then if I came in here, he could simply block with his bishop. That's the line he saw. So that's the line that's shown on the board, but in this position is when he resigned. When he realized he loses the rook and loses his attack. But bonus for you guys, after playing this move, I tried to find what my opponent would do. I found a stupidly crazy line that my opponent would do. And the line goes bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes, king takes, takes. I was like, what? I saw up to this point, but I did not see this in my calculation. And I was like, bro has to sacrifice 2 pieces. I know he's an aggressive player, but I doubt he's going to see it. And I was right. He didn't see it, and in this position, I win the game. So we have 2 wins and 1 loss. There are 3 more rounds. I simply need to win every single game from round 7 to round 9, and I qualify. Unfortunately, I will not be able to play round 7 as I have. So from this point on, I know I'm not qualifying. At this point, I'm just like, okay, let's win. So we'll continue this recap with round 8. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a great rest of the day. Peace.